A man is in space with no idea who he is or no idea how he has to save the Earth. Why? Let's read Project Hail Mary and find out. Welcome back to BG's Books. I'm Mr. BG, and today I will be reviewing Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So, of course, if you've been paying attention for like the last few months, you would know that a movie called Project Hail Mary was coming out in the theaters, and now it has been out for over a month, and it is like very wildly successful and stuff. It's like Ryan Gosling is in it, and so it's like I'm hearing it's a very popular movie. And of course, being me, I decided to read the book before watching the movie. I still have not seen the movie yet, but I'm rather excited. Anyway, so Project Hail Mary took me a while to read because it is just very dense and stuff with science. I will discuss all this later in the review, of course. But Project Hail Mary, it is a science fiction novel, so of course I had to jump on it. You know, I love science fiction. Dune is one of my favorite books ever. And then, of course, one of my favorite movie series is Star Wars and everything. But, yeah, so I love science fiction, and I've never read an Andy Weir before. This was my first one. And I just gotta say, I'm not that impressed, which I will get into later in the review. But anyway, so yeah, having all those spoilers aside, I guess, let's go ahead and jump right into the summary of Project Hail Mary so that I can fully discuss what this book is all about. So this book is one of those books that happens like out of chronological order. It kind of flip-flops back and forth in time. So to streamline this like recap and make everything more understandable, I'm just going to go with chronologically, but this isn't how it actually goes. So basically, the scientists are looking at the sun and notice that it's dimming, or notice that its luminance is no longer where it should be. It is dimming, and it is having like this line, later named the Petrova line, that is dimming it. And so scientists also deduce that within 30 years or so, the world is going to die, basically, because the sun will just, like, no longer be bright enough to sustain life. So the Earth will be plunged into an ice age. So they appoint this woman called Eva Stratt, who then appoints this middle school science teacher named Ryland Grace, who has a degree in molecular biology and cellular biology or something like that. And basically she says, okay, we have a sample from Venus, so just get to work. And so he starts doing experiments on this stuff, and I don't really remember what all experiments he does. Most of this book, like 90% of it, is just science experiments. But basically what you need to know is that he later calls this thing astrophage, and it is attracted to light from suns. Anyway, so Eva Stratt also notices that this one star in another system called Tau Ceti is not having the same dimming effects that all the other suns in the universe are. So she starts designing a spacecraft called the Hail Mary with a 3-man crew to kind of go investigate and do some science on it. And so Grace now serves as kind of like a trainee or a trainer for these people. And so the mission is supposed to be carried out by 3 people named Dubois and Ilyukina and Yao, but Dubois gets blown up in an explosion. So that means Stratt has to force Grace against his will. Sorry, I just cannot talk today, apparently. Anyway, so Stratt basically forces Grace against his will to go on the suicide mission because they can't return home. And she says that she will sedate him and give him temporary amnesia so that he doesn't destroy the mission out of spite. So anyway, the launch goes as planned, and then 4 years and 8 months later, Grace wakes up. This is the actual beginning of the book, by the way, and then he can't remember who he is. And then over the coming months and stuff, he starts slowly remembering who he is over those memories that I just told you about. And then while he's stuck in space, he does some more science experiments. But eventually he comes in contact with an alien ship that he calls the Blip A because that's what it says on his screen. And then the ship's dock, and then Grace soon meets this little five-legged, eyeless rock alien creature that he calls Rocky. And then Rocky speaks in like some sort of like musical notes, at least that's how the book like writes it as. But then Grace kind of gets accustomed to the language and starts to understand Rocky. So then it turns out that Rocky is also here on the same mission to save his son as well from destruction. And so he and Grace agree to team up. So about 300 something pages of science later, they figure out the cure for astrophage, and they basically decide to go their separate ways. And so on the way back, because Rocky just has so much astrophage fuel, so he just gives Grace some so that Grace can go back to Earth. So anyway, Grace is going back home. He's enjoying life. He's a little lonely without Rocky now, but you know, who knows about that. But then he discovers that one of his breeding tanks with astrophage and stuff, yeah, again, part of the science stuff that I don't remember and cannot get into. Anyway, he realizes that part of the Talmoeba, which is something that happened in their science experiments, has been eating all the astrophage and stuff. And so Grace gets it under control, but the astrophage happens to eat through xenonite, which is what Rocky's ship is made entirely of. So now he has to choose between going back to Earth and saving Rocky. So he chooses Rocky, so he rushes back over there within like a few days, and then meets up with Rocky again, saves him, and then Grace is just like, you know what, I'm just gonna move into Arid with you. That's where, well, Adrian, that's where the Iridians live. That's what they're called. So Grace is just like, I'm just gonna go back to Arid with you. So 16 years later, Grace has kind of got accustomed to arid life. You know, there's no sun because they have no radiation at all. Gravity is like 29 times thicker there than on Earth. So, you know, very heavy stuff. You can't exactly lift anything. But so Rocky eventually tells him that the sun has returned to full luminescence, so Earth has been saved. And then Grace decides to go back to his job as being a science teacher, but this time to Iridian children. And even though I missed quite a bit of details, that is basically how Project Hail Mary ends. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, I wasn't too crazy on Project Hail Mary. It's not that it wasn't a great book and stuff. It's like, I love the concept of the sun dying from a mysterious space entity that we just don't know how to solve. In fact, I think that's rather realistic in a sense. I mean, I hope it won't happen, but it's presented in like a semi-realistic way. So I like the actual story of the book, but the thing that really drags the book down is just that, like, most of it, like, as I said, about 90% of it is just like science experiments and scientific talk and like explaining every possible thing. And like, I'm not a scientist. I don't have a PhD in molecular biology or whatever Grace has. In fact, back when I was in school, science was one of the more boring subjects that I had. So I'm not too keen on real science. If it's Star Wars science, like things happen because of the Force, or Dune science, like things happen because of melange, that's fine. I can get into that. But realistic science is just not for me. And so the heavy explanation of everything scientific in this book just really dragged it down for me, which is a shame because, as I said, I do really like the actual plot of this thing. I think Ryland Grace is an interesting character. I think Rocky is just a very lovable sidekick, and I love Grace and Rocky's kind of back and forth on stuff. So there's a lot of this book to like. It's just that most of it is science stuff. So if you're not into science, you're probably not going to enjoy it that much. But anyway, so also another complaint I have is that it's a little too long for its own good. The copy I have is 476 pages. So I think if maybe like 100, 150 pages were cut out of it, I think it could have been a lot shorter, much more concise. A lot of the scientific explanation would be gone, which would make it easier to understand for people like me that don't care about science. So I mean, yeah, overall, I think it's a fine book, but it's not a great book, if that makes any sense to you. But with the success of the movie, which I still would like to see, Andy Weir has teased a possible sequel in the works for Project Hail Mary. And to be honest, I don't really think it needs one. I like the ending the way it is. I like how Grace kind of ends the story on his little note there. But I mean, if Andy Weir is gonna write a sequel, I mean, I'll read it and review it. But I just hope it's not as much science. Although it is Andy Weir and he writes hard science, so that will probably be the case. Anyway, overall, like I said, Project Hail Mary is a fine book, but it is quite a few steps away from being absolutely amazing or even great. So go read Project Hail Mary if you are very much into science. Like if you are a scientist in the making, I'd highly recommend it to you. It has a lot of science stuff. I can't fact check that without doing a lot of research. But if you're not into like real science like I am or similar to me, you're just not gonna enjoy it that much. Again, I love the story, but the science just kind of kills it for me. But yeah, so go read it if you want to. Don't read it if you don't want to. It's fine with me. But that is the end of the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed my review for Project Hail Mary. I am sorry it kind of felt disjointed, especially during the summary there. But as I said, with so much science, it was kind of hard for me to explain things without understanding it myself. So if it just kind of felt a little random at some sections, that's why, and I do apologize. I promise the next book review will be more explanatory, I guess. But anyway, yeah, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Please let me know what books you want me to read and review next. I have already finished like 2 more, actually 3 more. Well, one is Carrie, so I'm not really gonna touch that one again. I've made enough videos on Carrie. But anyway, I've read 2 more books that I actually can review, so stay tuned for those reviews coming in the near future. But anyway, yeah, I've been Mr. BG. This has been BG's Books. And, oh, hey, Rocky.